Hello everyone, I wanted to share a video with you guys from Scott Jensen. He's the Minnesota state senator and a family physician. He seems to be the only politician and only doctor trying to get the correct information on COVID-19 out and about. He's struggling. His YouTube channel is nearly impossible to find through a Google or a YouTube search, so I'm going to drop a link in the description. I highly recommend going to his channel and subscribing. He's even made videos saying how his medical license is in jeopardy for getting the truth out. Now, this video is a little bit extensive. It's like 16 or 18 minutes long. I apologize, but I do want you to pay very close attention to what he's saying. There are some excellent points being made. And at one point he even says that they just built a multi-million-dollar morgue that hasn't even seen one cadaver through this whole thing. Storing equipment. It would be cheaper to buy storage units and use those to store all the equipment. It just baffles me, it blows my mind. So without further ado, here's Scott Jensen.
Colleagues, do challenges remain? For certain. Do calculated risks remain? Absolutely. Are we living under a COVID cloud that has turned our spirits into melancholy, such that we don't see the world as we used to? We don't greet one another as we used to? Yes, we do. But on the other hand, are we dealing right now with an emergency that equates to some sort of tsunami that's going to take out the homes and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in a matter of minutes? Are we dealing with tornadoes or hurricanes or natural disasters or fires that will eliminate people's lives in a matter of minutes? We're not. We have challenges. But the emergency that, if you will, equates to the need for peacetime powers, that's not with us today. We have had almost a year of COVID. December of 2019, the emergence, possibly even in November, and we're in October. One thing that does clearly remain is fear. And fear magnifies the sense of helplessness. Fear needs to be examined. It needs to be understood. We need to absolutely dig in and across the aisle work together. And I would thank Senator Klein for his passion and his commitment. He takes care of COVID-19 patients in the hospital. I take care of some 4 dozen COVID-19 patients in the clinic. We have different experiences and we have different perspectives. But I would challenge either Senator Klein or myself to come up with one decision point that Governor Walz needs to make in the next 24 hours or the next 48 hours. I appreciate the fact that Governor Walz and his staff have come out and changed course now in regards to nursing homes, and that's just being released. That once again, residents of long-term care facilities can have visitors. Thank you. And to Commissioner Malcolm, I say thank you for once again allowing Minnesotans to see what the daily statewide census is in regards to COVID-19 patients occupying ICU beds and hospital beds. It was unfortunate that this critical data point was removed from our site for 2 weeks. But I appreciate the reconsideration and the fact that the Department of Health has responded to the outcry of thousands and thousands of Minnesotans. Governor Walz, the path to examining and understanding and getting the public trust to come alongside you is not through a loss of transparency. It's through more transparency. It's not going to happen due to a lack of engagement. It's going to happen by more engagement. It's not going to happen by living in an echo chamber. It's going to happen when you break down the barriers of groupthink. Minnesotans know that the legislature stands ready to play its part in helping you with those calculated risks. 2 days ago, there was an article in the paper where you, Governor Walz, mentioned your relationship with Mr. Andy Slavitt. And you said, a healthy tension exists between us. And then you went on to explain that your role requires a more managed response. Thank you for that. But can we not have that healthy tension with you? Can we not have the leadership of the Senate and the leadership of the House work with you? The emergency is not present. It is true that we've been fed a steady diet of data corruption. Physicians across Minnesota were coached and encouraged to use COVID-19 as a diagnosis for the cause of death, even if it didn't cause necessarily the death. If it contributed, we were advised to put it on the death certificate. This is new. This didn't happen with influenza. Senator Hayden spoke of people's families being ravaged by COVID-19. My heart goes out to them. But my family has been ravaged by influenza. My forebears died from influenza. The ravaging of my family ancestors is no different than what's going on now. We're just a different world. We're just a much more globally connected world. We have seen data corrupted by the CDC when it chose to commingle data coming from PCR tests right alongside of blood serology tests, when these tests tell us totally different things. Epidemiologists, virologists, infectious disease people across the country and across the world said, what is the CDC thinking? There has been so much data corruption that it's an absolute logical step for Minnesotans, Americans, and global citizens to have lost trust in the leaders who are supposed to take us through this. Schools are not super spreaders. Do you remember that 6 weeks ago? This was going to be the problem. The schools were the super spreaders. Well, let's refer to The Atlantic, a liberal-leaning news source that comes out a week ago and says they are not the super spreaders. That fear appears to have been over-magnified. Immunity is emerging. We had some good news the other day, but it never got published. We found that cellular immunity is actually a real way for us to beat this disease. And the fact of the matter is, we have identified people who had cellular immunity that is resisting COVID-19, and they had it from blood samples before December of 2019. So when we start talking about vaccines, we have to remember that this may not happen, but we will have humoral immunity, which is the kind of immunity I am fortunate enough to possess. So when I had COVID-19 7 weeks ago, unbeknownst to me, my body turned out antibodies. Another significant group of people will have a cellular immunity, which is much more difficult to measure, but the fact of the matter is people have developed cellular immunity that may well fight against COVID-19, and they may well have built that cellular immunity through the exposure to different coronaviruses. And then we know that some people will have an innate disease resistance. And then we have the high hope that we'll get a vaccine that will help take us the rest of the way. But if it doesn't, what we're hearing from World Health Organizations and CDC leading personnel is that we are still going to get through this, and we will. Now, the World Health Organization has just come out and said, Dr. Nabarro, he said, lockdowns should not be a part of our response unless it's to regroup and reorganize. Well, the only way we would need to regroup and reorganize is if we go back to those goalposts that we talked about last February and March and said, are we going to be able to flatten the curve so that our healthcare facilities will not be overwhelmed and overrun? Well, we can't know that if we're not going to be allowed to see the data. We have also seen an invasion of our rights. A couple of weeks ago, we saw that the decision that Governor Walz made to distribute the addresses of active COVID-19 households in the state of Minnesota were being disseminated to places they shouldn't have been. It was bad enough that some 500 localities in the state of Minnesota would be given a list of COVID-19 active households, an executive order that the ACLU objected to. That was bad enough. But then when we hear 3 weeks ago that, whoops, counties were not just getting the addresses they were supposed to get, they were potentially getting the entire state. We have seen lockdowns cripple businesses, not because the businesses were unsafe, but because they were non-essential. We have seen school closures take a toll on our children that we will not be able to measure the impact of that for years and years to come. We have seen $9 million ad campaigns that do nothing more than support the policies of the Department of Health and the governor's executive orders, and they have not highly motivated patients to cut your cigarette usage down to half of what you're using. Lose 5 pounds, get off the couch, start some zinc, start some vitamin C, start some vitamin D. What has been there from the Department of Health in Minnesota to motivate Minnesotans to do everything they can to make their immune system more effective? We have a $7 million giant, quote, morgue that has never had a cadaver in it, but it can now store equipment. It would have been cheaper to buy a bunch of mini storage units. We have terrorized Minnesotans with long-term care policies that we will never forget. Residents are desperate for hugs and human touches and love. Minnesotans are looking for a source of moral authority. And 2 of the places they might have looked might have been the elected leaders of Minnesota. How are we doing working together? Or they might have looked at my profession, the profession of medicine. And I apologize to Minnesotans that my profession has not been up to the task. We have quibbled and bickered no differently than legislators. And for that, I am sorry. We have not allowed the robust intellectual conversation to take place that has taken place for decades and decades and decades when physicians disagree. And that is why, over the last week, there is this thing, this document called the Great Barrington Declaration. And this is a declaration that has now received some 400 to 500,000 signatures around the world. And it speaks to what the issue is and what the issue should be for physicians and scientists. It speaks to the issue that lockdown policies are producing devastating effects on long-term public health. It has lowered childhood vaccine rates. It has worsened cardiovascular disease outcomes. It has caused fewer cancer screenings and more advanced disease to be diagnosed when the diagnosis is finally established. And the deteriorating mental health is incredible. And to Senator Hayden's point, many of the policies that have been put in place have done exactly what he said. It has indiscriminately and more powerfully hurt people of color and minority groups. The most compassionate approach that we will be allowed going forward will balance the risks and benefits of vaccines, herd immunity pursuits, humoral immunity, cellular immunity, and disease resistance. Members, this is not an emergency. Right now, we have the time to think through our thoughts and our policies. We have the time to recognize the shortcomings of our legislation. Governor Walz knows that Minnesota's emergency powers statute does not have pandemic statute language in it, like other states do. Our statute has no limit or limitation on government powers, such as a necessity limitation. This should be fixed. Minnesota's emergency power statute violates Article 3's non-delegation doctrine. Typically, there should be a delegation that there should be the least restrictive means used. That's what we do in our statutes with Minnesota's guardianship statute. Minnesota's emergency power violates Article 3's ban on legislative vetoes. The legislature doesn't veto the governor's acts. The governor vetoes our acts. Our statutes are unfortunately not serving us as well as they could. If we vote for this resolution that Senator Benson has proposed, I don't see this as any kind of vote of condemnation to Governor Walz's policies. He's worked immensely hard. He's had a staff that's worked overtime. I see this as an affirmation that we know that he can invite the legislature with judicial oversight to the table. And we can do this better. We can do this better than we've been doing it. And we can do it more thoughtfully, so that when executive orders are done, there is a spirit of transparency. This is not trying to give a grade to Governor Walz. This is Minnesotans saying, we want a broader discussion. We want a recognition that while challenges exist, the emergency that represents natural disasters is over. So please, Governor Walz, it's time to start working together. We stand ready. Thank you.